Where do you place Arn in the lineage of NWA TV champs?
I mean, Arn Anderson is one of the greatest talents that ever worked anywhere. I think he probably gave more prestige to the TV championship than the TV championship gave to Arn. It was something that we had. So we were trying to, at least it was still, that hurt was still fresh, that we couldn't put the Horsemen back together, which we all thought would be somewhat of a difference maker. So we're trying at least to give as much credibility to Arn as we could, because we needed to build up some stars. We needed some stars, and they were not only one of the greatest tag teams in the history of wrestling, but also they had drawn some of the biggest houses that Crockett had ever drawn. They had drawn some of the biggest ratings that TBS Wrestling had ever drawn, and we got a chance to get them. And as a matter of fact, that was it would have been wonderful to have. Not only were we able to have the Rock and Roll Midnight revived again, but also we would have had the Rock and Roll versus the Horsemen revived again. And as you will see here shortly, the Rock and Roll made a tremendous difference coming back fresh after, you know, however long they've been gone. They made a big difference in the ratings. And I mean, at that point, nothing was going to make a difference in the house show numbers.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Was the luster still there for a Rock and Roll Express in 90, or had some of the popularity waned? I mean, you got the numbers to prove it, so I guess.
Wait till we get to February.
All right. In February, on February 3rd.
Oh, wait a minute. Don't jump ahead that quick, because we got to do a few things here. For example, wait a minute now. Let's see. Hold on. January 16th, Atlanta, TBS Television, the taping was canceled because we all showed up to Center Stage in Atlanta to do the national television Saturday night TBS show, and the idiot named Don Glass that Hurd had hired away from the WWF. See, Don Glass worked in the event booking department, and he was a stooge coffee boy for Ed Cohen, who was the genius who booked all the tours and the buildings and had all the relationships with the major arenas. Well, this Don Glass worked in the department, so Hurd hired him away thinking, well, we got all these buildings, right? Well, he was the fucking coffee boy. So one of the things that he booked was this Center Stage taping on January 16th. We got there.
Chairs.
Center Stage was in the middle of renovations. They had concrete ledges. There were no seats in the building and concrete dust all over. And they actually thought for a second about letting the fans in and letting them sit in the dust on the ledges. And then finally they said, no, let's just, we'll do the taping tomorrow.
You're the ringside manager, of course, for the Midnight Express. You got your own talk segment, Louisville Slugger. You're part of the booking committee. You got more jobs than a Jamaican at this point. You're clearly the hardest working man in all of WCW.
Well, I tried.
As they add responsibility, do they have to pay you more?
The only thing I got paid extra for was when I joined the booking committee. I got an extra $300 a week. Otherwise, but that was not unusual. Even before the guaranteed contracts, if you worked there, if you were on the roster, and they said, okay, Sean, you know, you're working a third match, but then on the second show, go out and do the color or whatever. That's what you did. We didn't fucking bitch and whine and have goddamn agents negotiating contracts. Well, if he's going to do announcing, he needs to get another $100,000 a year. No, it was more exposure. It got me out there to do my shit, talk about the Midnight Express, or since I was on the booking committee, at least I could get the angles over from the heel perspective, and plus I'm working with Jim Ross. So
I was going to say, how was
job.
it working with JR?
He taught me pretty much everything I know about. Actually, I could go out there and be a heel and, you know, just aggravate people, but as far as broadcasting and as far as doing color commentary and analysis and as far as and knowing how to read copy and jump in and jump out and do the plugs and et cetera and pitches and inflections and everything. I'm sitting there, you know, learning to paint from Rembrandt. So I should have paid him. I wouldn't paid Hurd, but I'd paid Jim Ross.
What's the preparation, if there is any, that you have to do for the co-host?
Well, let's see, February 3rd, you said, right?
Yeah.
What, Center Stage, that's January.
It was actually taped on January 31st, so maybe.
Oh, well, that helps out.
Yeah. It airs on
Center
February 3rd.
Stage, good Lord, I should color code these things. Center Stage, January 31st.
He should color code these from 1983.
Well,
He should color code them.
See, first and I was writing. Let me go ahead and explain to you now how we did the formats, and then and you'll be able to B-roll some of this stuff.
Yeah.
We would have booking meetings once a week. We would fly to some fucking place or whatever, Detroit or wherever, that Herd would get together with us while we were all on because me and Flair and Kevin were on the road. Jim Ross was on the road for TVs, but for house shows he was back at the office. And everybody else, Barnett and all those guys, were in the office. So they would go on the road and we would meet at a airport hotel or get a boardroom or something somewhere. And absolutely nothing of the booking was actually done in the booking meetings. Because Herd would grump and argue and grouse at Rick or at me or at whoever and talk about what he wanted to have done or do or whatever. And then we'd all leave, and then Rick would sit with me and Kevin in the car or on the way to the airport or before the show or whatever and say, okay, I want to work with so-and-so. Sean, you work a program with Anthony. This would be a great angle. We'll do this. Boom, boom, boom. He'd give us the high spots. You know, and some main event matches to put on television that he had in his head. And then he'd tell me and Kevin, okay, go fill it in. So then I would sit down, sometimes in a room late at night, or if I ever was home, with the talent roster and all the paperwork, because look how I am. And I would do formats. And I would make sure that everybody was represented in some kind of way and that all the things that we needed to do were involved somehow. And then I'd write them out by hand, and then I would show them to Kevin. And Kevin would say, well, Jimmy, you got a good maintenance show there. I can't do Boston. But it needs a little oomph there, or you need to put this. So he would give me a couple of ways to dress up just a flat job match, or he'd give me a little thing to do where somebody would be involved or whatever that would juice it up a little bit and add a little something to that hour. And he would tell me at the same time why he was doing that, and so he was teaching me. So then I'd go and I'd put that down, and I'd redo the shows, and then I'd send them in by the fax machine to Janie Engel at the office. And she'd type them up, which is then what you see here. Then Herd would see them, and Herd would get mad, and he'd take out all the live interviews, and he'd put in 30-second pre-tapes. Then we'd go, because he didn't like live interviews, because that's the only wrestling show he'd ever seen was the one that he worked on in St. Louis when he was a director in the 60s, and that's one thing Sam Muchnick didn't do was very many interviews. So he didn't think, he thought well, goddamn, we need a good wrestling bout to keep the people's attention. If Ric Flair is doing a live interview in the ring with fucking Woman, and JR's holding the microphone, and Flair's doing his thing, and the fans are going crazy, that's bad. But if we have a wrestling match involving the fucking New Zealand militia, well, that'll keep the fans' attention. So he'd take all the live interviews out and put in 30-second pre-tapes instead. Then we would go to the show, and we'd have the production meeting at the taping, and as Rick would look at the formats, he'd say, is this what we had? And then I'd get out my originals, and I'd say, no, Rick, who changed it? Well, actually, Herd would tell Jim Ross because he was in the office to change it. That's where JR got on sideways with Flair, because it would be JR changed it. So Rick would have me change it back, and then we'd do what we originally planned most of the time if we caught it, and then Herd would go ballistic again. But anyway, so you got the list of pre-tapes at the start. I would write those out, and they'd be typed out. Then this is the order of live events, and for the show and the date that it ordered, and then this is the format. And the preparation on the right-hand side, here's all the plugs. Tonight, at the Oak City Fairgrounds Coliseum, Buzz Sawyer and Dr. Death. Tomorrow night, Dallas. This Tuesday night, The Clash, Texas Shootout, starting time 8:05 Eastern. This Friday night, Gordon Soley and Jim Ross for the Power Hour, Funk's Grill, the Royal Families, all the bullet points. I would sit down with JR as the color guy, and we'd go through all of that and make sure that we knew what we were wanting to do and wanting to plug. Join us for the Extended Wrestling Hotline coverage of The Clash on 1-900 buy this shit or whatever. And so and then JR and we would sit, and if there was a main event, we would really go into it in a little bit more depth on what we wanted to talk about and how we wanted to get the guys over. But if it was, Keith Hart and Pat Rose versus the Fabulous Freebirds, that was pretty much self-explanatory, and that was the
But you personally, before going in, would you want some some tidbit about individuals? Did you do any of that type of stuff?
Well, I mean, you know, if it was somebody
college they graduated from, amateur.
Oh yeah.
Would you try to get little facts?
Yeah, Jr. did a lot of that stuff, and he would feed them to me. And see, once again, as the color guy, that was not my job necessarily, especially as a heel color guy. JR was going to really give, especially if it was a baby face, he was going to give a lot of the guy's background, because I was, as a heel, more intent on tearing the baby face down than build him up. But if it was somebody I'd never seen before, I would ask them also a little bit something about him, but I generally knew the background, or at least the background that we wanted to talk about.
When in wrestling did they start dropping the commentary into the matches that were taped without announcers, either not there, or certainly them not doing the commentary?
They started doing it when they figured out how to, because there was never a budget to do something like that. You had to do the commentary, either that or it was obvious. There was a film that was shot in the arena, and then the announcer is in a studio talking over it. Well, and then this happened. But to make it actually appear that it's the announcer is live, that was around this time the WWF and TBS got budgets and decided that they could do that. And that's,
were you doing it here?
No. Well, no, not on the TBS shows.
Okay.
There might have been a time or two, but for the most part, the announcers were always at center stage or wherever we taped the Saturday night TBS show, and they wanted to be, because it's not the same when you do it canned. Although JR and I tried to, eventually in the WWF, we got to where we were pretty good at it, and their studio was so good at sound mixing, see, Titans. But the TBS people, they couldn't, the sound mixing was, you know, at that point.
How's their taping facilities these days over at WWE, Jim?
It's network quality. I've never said anything bad about their production. Their producer, that's a different story, but not their production.
Did you spend any time with them?
Nope.
No?
We passed in the hallway.
Passed it like shit. Oh, you did pass in the hallway.
He was talking to somebody, and I walked this way, and he looked at me, and I looked at him. I didn't speak to him. He didn't speak to me, and I never saw him again.
No. Nothing.
No.
All right. Why is the decision made to turn the Horsemen heel again?
Well, it was always going to head in that direction, because we knew that, especially if Tully and Arn had come back, the people would be so glad to see them, especially after some of the stuff they had seen the previous year, that they would go crazy and they would cheer them and they'd be baby faces. But then Rick always wanted to be a heel, and Tully and Arn's best use was as heels. And once again, you could have Tully and Arn in the rock and roll, and etc. So it was always going to go that way, but we knew that there was an initial settle-in period, and with Arn, it was the same thing. They were so happy to see him back. And the reason why Ole was back, he was doing a favor, because we were short of Horsemen. Because Ole, he had his money and he had his business, and he didn't give a shit to get back in the wrestling business. But he did it as a favor. So that was the way, because Flair wanted to eventually put the belt on Sting, and had promised Sting the belt, and it was going to happen at that pay-per-view at Wrestle War, that this clash was the go-home clash for. Pay-per-view is going to take place in a couple weeks, so that was the big angle for it.